is going to be recorded for the purpose of the community sharing and the celebration. As you all know, most of you enter on mute. We recommend you to keep you in mute unless you are going to be talking, so you don't disturb with any noise that may come to your room. If you have anything to say in the moment that somebody is talking, you may raise your hand, or you can also write on the chat. And you can always, if you have questions, you can always put them on the chat. If you get blocked or frozen, or you don't hear, or you cannot see anything, the best thing you can do is get out of the room and then enter again. Won't be any problem to enter. And as you all well known as well, this is all part of a celebration series. So this is the fourth session. John, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is all part of the celebrations. We are on the fourth session of today. And as Ginita was saying, one of the things that we have been trying to do is bringing back one message from the previous session. So John, Ginita.
Okay, it's Ginetta speaking. I was the facilitator of the third session, and we would like to share with you our relay message, our takeaway. It's when people come together to share knowledge and collaborate, they can solve the most complex challenges. By building a vibrant ecosystem of communities of practice, an organization can foster learning, collaboration, and innovation to drive real development impact. I hope, and we hope that you take inspiration from this for your session, and of course, good luck. Thank you very much for the time you dedicated to us.
Over to you, John.
All right, and I guess I'm gonna go straight to Danita. Thank you, Janetta. Thank you, Rocio. And Danita, would you like to start us for conversational leadership?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Rocio and Ginetta, for all of the work that you've put into this. Thank you to km4dev for having this session with us, because we think that conversational leadership is the potential for the next level of KM, or a parallel track. So the way we're going to do it is that I'm going to speak a little bit about conversation and what conversation is, why it's important, what it means, all of that. John will then talk about leadership, and then David's going to bring it home by putting conversation and leadership together, conversational leadership. So I'll just go right in. I think a lot of people would ask, why is it important to think about, talk about, learn about conversation? It's something that I've done my entire life. I've been able to speak, and I've been able to be in front of people, or I don't necessarily need coaching on how to converse. And then we start to think about what is conversation exactly? Is it between two people? Is it between, is it a one-to-many situation? Is it a many-to-many situation? Is it, can you have a conversation with a baby who doesn't know words yet? Can you have a conversation with a piece of art that moves you? So one of the reasons that we are so interested in this is because as technology has brought in so many different opportunities to converse, to connect with each other, it's also made us aware of the fact that a lot of our interactions are leaving us feeling unsatisfied, unfulfilled, frustrated. And so what can shaping a conversation, if you look at the purpose, the content, the enablers, and the design of a conversation, can you shift how you think, how you operate in your personal and professional life? So I was thinking about this a lot, about how conversation has helped me adjust in certain aspects of my life. And I'd love to give you an example of my personal life. If any of you ever happen to meet my dad, please don't tell him that he was the subject of an international discussion. That would be. My family is a pretty close-knit family. I love spending time with them. But part of coming into the family group, because my sister and I lived we live in New York. My parents live in North Carolina. There's always this tension of, here you are, we're so excited, but we're already thinking about when you're going to leave. And we had this one time that my father just fell into a funk, and you could see he was hurting, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And so I talked to him, and it turns out he had wanted something very specific in our vacation, in our time together. And that was how he showed his love to his family. But he'd never said the words, I want to do this thing. So I took that, and the next time we met together, we had a family kickoff meeting and just said, okay, everybody, let's talk about what is an absolute necessity that each person wants to get out of this vacation. What is a thing that you want to do? Do you want to spend time with a certain someone? Do you want to visit a certain thing? What is an absolute necessity? And then moving it to what is a nice to have? And then sort of what is the goal of our family? I knowledge managed the hell out of my family. And they, pardon my language, and my father was able to verbalize because he was given permission in a strange way. He didn't need permission from us, but he had that permission to say explicitly what he wanted to accomplish. And that was years ago. And we still, every time we have a family vacation, we have a kickoff meeting. What do you want to accomplish? It's changed so much for our family. And then bringing that into, bye-bye, Janetta. Bringing that into your workplace. If you have a kickoff meeting with your colleagues to say, what is absolutely necessary? What is nice to have? What are our deliverables? How can we come together? It changes the entire timbre of how you deal with each other, because things are set from the very beginning. And one other very brief example, we had a team in my organization. The feedback was that the manager was disrespectful to the team. After questions, after sitting down, what it turns out is the manager was an extreme introvert preference and felt very socially awkward. When she came in, her team would say good morning to her, and she never replied. And that was the foundation of that entire team dynamic. As soon as that was elevated, as soon as that was brought into the conversation, and she understood how important it was to say hello to her team, the dynamic shifted. So I'll leave it with that about the power of bringing in purpose, content, enablers, and design to a conversation, how a very small thing can change a trajectory. John, over to you.
All right, thank you, Danita. That's a bit of conversation. How about if I try and offer a bit of leadership, and I may even try and type and speak at the same time, if that's even possible. What would I want to say about leadership? You know, here's what I'm thinking. What if I were to ask all of you a question? What is your definition of leadership? What does leadership mean to you? We could open the microphones and chat, or in text. If you wanted to, you know, put it in the chat, you're welcome to put it there. But yeah, it is a bit of a question and a pause here, to say, you know, are you aware of your definition of leadership? Just as a general concept, what does leadership mean to you? And as you're thinking and maybe typing, I'll offer a couple. Not to say that these are right or better or worse, just a few to consider. One is one that I've heard a little bit more recently, which is leadership is forming a team so strong that you can't tell who the leader is. Leadership is forming a team so strong that you can't tell who the leader is. That was an interesting one and intrigued me. Another one, David, Danita, and I talk about all the time, comes from Dr. Patricia Shaw, who talks about leadership is convening a conversation that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And that one has caused some thoughts and some actions and some behaviors for me. So Dr. Patricia Shaw says, leadership is convening a conversation that otherwise wouldn't have happened. Now, in our practice here, that David, I'm sure we'll also talk about in a second, when we think about conversational leadership, the leadership portion, what we're trying to offer or remind everyone is, leadership isn't necessarily only a position. It isn't a title. It isn't a certain level in a hierarchy. Leadership is a practice. It's an ongoing, every day, every moment. Are you leading? Are you following? Are you both? Are you aware of how you're leading? Are you aware of how you're following? That kind of leadership, a complex, dynamic, always shifting practice of leadership. So then the thing I might close with before handing it over to David is we feel some pity for this word leadership, because it's frankly been decades that we've been talking about, especially human resources people have been talking about, there's a difference between leadership and management. I'm not going to go into that. There's a difference between leader and leadership. Those are two different things. And it's been so blurred, so confused, so many people have been trying to say everything I just said. It's not just a leader. It's not command and control. It's not only dictating. It's not only authoritative. There are times for that kind of leadership, absolutely. We've now started to hear this new word that I want to mention as related to leadership. It comes from Henry Mintzberg. He talks about communityship. And the funny thing David might say is, as much as Henry talks about communityship, he doesn't actually define it. His definition is, you know it when you see it, which is a bit of a strange definition, right? How do you work with that? So who am I to throw some words in there, but I will. I'm thinking communityship might be some kind of shared collective leadership, some kind of thinking about, I step in as a leader, I practice my leadership, you see it, you experience it, I step back, you step in, you practice your leadership. So it goes all the way back to that first quote. Leadership might just be forming a team so strong, you can't tell who the leader is. So David, while I type my notes in, what would you say about conversational leadership?
What would I say about conversational leadership? An interesting side note, I just realized I just published the 240th version of my newsletter. So it's 20 years old, the same anniversary, the same age as km4dev. So I just realized that was really, really rather wonderful. But so I've been around a little while, you can tell by the grey. And so I've been thinking about knowledge management. I've been thinking about conversation actually for well over 20 years. 15 years ago, I started to run my knowledge cafes, and it's given me a lot of insight into conversation. But then about 5 years ago, I started to write my so-called book. It's a cross between a blog and a book on conversation. And originally it was about the cafe, and it was broadly about conversation and the benefits of conversation. But I had a nagging question all the time in my head. Why did I feel conversation was so important? Yes, there were the points that Danita made. I mean, there's some conversation's just a wonderful human invention, if you will, tool. But I felt there was something deeper to conversation, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and actually until about 2 years ago. And I guess as I get older, I was reflecting on my life and realizing that in 70 years or so, I was born in 1948, you know, since the end of the Second World War, this last 75 years, the world has become a very, very different place. And I was wondering what was so different about the world. And it's the fact that it's now hyper-connected. You know, the world is just phenomenally connected, and it's not just the internet and the World Wide Web and the global economy, you know, our distribution channels, our supply chains. And we've seen this with COVID, just how interconnected the world is. And the one thing that we've learned in recent years is that, you know, hyperconnectivity like that leads to massive complexity. And again, I think, as you well know, the American Army have a wonderful acronym for what it means to live in a complex world. It's a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's unpredictable, it's complex, confusing, and ambiguous. And our biggest challenge, if we want to see a better world, and we face a lot of problems right now, is to make sense of the world, to make sense of that complexity. And the way we make sense of the world is through conversation, is bringing people together, cognitively diverse groups of people together to have conversations to make sense of the world. Why do we want to make sense? We want to make good sense of the world so we can make more informed decisions, make better decisions, and I think innovate more wisely. And when I say innovate more wisely, I'm thinking about innovating in ways that don't have unintended or unforeseen consequences, which so much of our past innovations have brought about. So for me, conversation's great. There's a whole lot of stuff around there, but the really important piece about conversation is this ability to make sense of a complex world. Now, as soon as we start looking at things in terms of complexity, we also recognize that in a complex world, you can't have just one or two or small number of people or organizations in some sort of hierarchical construct managing that world in a command and control fashion. You need everybody to take responsibility for the problems that they see in the world, and to practice, to see leadership as a practice, and to step forward as leaders and do what they need to do, in only the way that they can, rather than expect the people in authority to do things for them. And again, when we start to think about leadership and we start to think about acting, how do we lead? How do we interact with other people? How do we influence other people? Of course, we do it through conversation. So it kind of comes full circle. So for me, this is the essence of what conversational leadership is about. It's about making sense of a complex world and working together more effectively. Maybe as a community ship, as John just mentioned, in a complex world. So that's my take on it anyway.
I love it. So shall we practice what we're saying and dive into conversation? It looks like we've got 32 people. So if I break us into 8 rooms, it should be rooms of 4, which I think could be a pretty decent size for a small group conversation. I honestly can't remember, David, Danita, what was the trigger? What was the question we were going to leave everyone with? Do you remember?
I wasn't involved in that conversation. I thought you and Danita had agreed that.
I have a guess. Do you remember, Danita, what we said exactly?
I think it's not necessarily a question so much as an opportunity. Okay. As you go into these breakout rooms, think about the ways in which your conversations, someone in the chat asked, how often do we have the ability to have conversations rather than collective monologues or speeches or not coming together on something. So I would say one of the questions that I would want to hear in those breakout rooms is, how can you shape conversations or allow others to shape conversations that will bring meaning and satisfaction and fulfillment into your lives?
All right, I'm typing into the chat. How can you shape conversations that will bring meaning into your life? There it is in the chat. And let's see, it's 22 past the hour. Let's do 12 minutes in this first breakout, and then we'll come back and we'll do one more breakout with all new groups and probably a very similar question. So you're welcome to use that prompt or discuss whatever your group is ready and compelled to discuss. How can you shape conversations that will bring meaning into your life? Ready, set, go. Okay, I think everyone is back in the main room. Welcome back. Let me give you a moment to take a deep breath, and I hope those conversations were great for you. I'm now going to recreate all the rooms. So if Zoom helps us out, ideally you'll be with a different group of people. 2 or 3 people just joined us, so they'll get a chance to join in here too. But I think let's go straight back into another. This I think will be 12 minutes, so a little bit shorter. Apologies for that. But same question. How can you shape conversations that will bring meaning into your life? Or whatever the group wants to talk about. So 12 minutes, one more breakout. Ready, set, go. Everybody's coming back. Okay, perfect timing. Let's wait a second. And it looks like we're all back. Welcome back. So this leaves us about 10 minutes as a full group to kind of do 2 things, but they're almost one and the same. One is to continue the conversation, and as you know, as part of this 20-year celebration, we're trying to have a relay message from each session to the next session. So we've written a first draft of our potential relay message, but I thought, why don't we just take 10 minutes as a group to continue the conversation? I'll take notes here in the notes section, and we'll pass that on to the next group. So wide open, who would like to continue the conversation at this point?
Hey, John, this is coming out of the program we're doing at Columbia and with Ed Hoffman and the crew. And what I was thinking of is conversation as a job to be done. So in other words, what do you hire a conversation for? What, you hire something as a job to be done. A lot of times, conversation is not seen as part of the work. It's seen as kind of an external thing. And what might be useful in this context is looking at conversation as itself a job to be done. And so that you hire the conversation, you bring the right resources to bear so that you can achieve an outcome just like you would when you hire a service to do something, or you buy you hire a person as a consultant, or you hire talent in that regard. So it's a different way of thinking about it. Over.
Love it. Thank you, Brett, as always.
Not all at once.
If I may put in my 2 cents,
Please.
Something which came up in the second conversation I had was definitely what I would call the inner and the outer aspect of the conversation. For example, the outer aspect is, okay, where will I have the conversation? Is there an agenda? What goals do we have? Blah, 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 blah. What we all know. It depends on the nature of the conversation. Because if I have an interview with somebody, that's different from making a strategic decision on the board meeting. That's the outer aspect. But to me, at least, the inner aspect is more important. And I would even go as far and say the inner aspect, which you bring to a conversation, I don't think changes so much. Your attitude, the way you relate to other people, i.e. be respectful of your opposite, be open to what the other person says, and try to be as authentic as you can be. And that is something I think we can all learn, and but often it gets lost. And the fact that we don't really give that much attention is, we think we know how to speak, but most so-called leaders, they're the worst communicators which I've come across. So I think it behooves us all to really listen and speak in a manner that we're not necessarily critical of them, as I just was, but I have no concrete leader in front of me, so I guess I can use that to illustrate it. But even if I came across such a leader, if I can find the right words or the right questions to ask somebody and tease him out of his comfort zone, in order to get sort of the conversation into a more meaningful area, that it's not just words and commands or whatever, then I think we have gained an awful lot in terms of having effective conversations, in terms of running organizations which work and thrive, and I think also world peace.
Thank you, Hugo.
Hi, this is Ian. Just a thought that, in a way, conversation is a kind of a unique opportunity when you have a particular set of people, like in the room or online, and really the task is to get the best out of that group of people. And quite often, a lot of things get in the way of that. Like if you have, preset agenda and objectives, and you want to get everyone to agree, and you're trying to seek consensus, sometimes that gets in the way of getting the best out of everyone. And so for me, I just thinking about it of both in yourself, in committing to give the best of yourself, but really how can you get the best out of everybody and what everyone has to bring, even the things that are perhaps unseen or people are reluctant to bring out. And I think for me, that's kind of a really important part about that, because otherwise you're not maximizing the benefit of having that group of people together.
Thank you, Ian, and you got quite a reaction to your background too.
That's us. It's us here.
Yes, it is. Wide open. What other thoughts do people have, or feelings, or senses? Wide open.
Okay.
I see Sharoma.
Yeah, I will be very quick. We had a very good, two good sessions. It's very good. For me, I think if you want to shape a conversation, you really need to understand the audience and the environment, because you can have one message, but depending on the audience, you need to change it, because you will not get what you want, or if as a team what you want to get them want to do, unless you understand the audience. And also it is very important we learn the art of breaking ice when there is unknown people. So I think also the conversation, you need to make it very unique, so that unique and honest, so that we build the trust. So yeah, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Sharoma. Build the trust. And I heard someone else, but sorry, I couldn't see who it was.
I believe it was John Hoven.
Yes. Team building, if you're getting together with a group of people that you have not worked with before, is like fitting the pieces of a puzzle together. You need to find out what they want and what they're capable of doing, capable of contributing, and make them fit. And purposeful conversation seems like a very efficient way of making this happen. And specifically, the questions that Donita proposed. What is the absolute necessity you want to get out of this? What would be nice to have? Seems like two very quick, simple questions to hear from everybody in the group. What do you want? What can you contribute? And from that, we build a team.
Thank you, John. Guessing at least one more. I'm looking at hands raised, but I think John and Sharoma, is it Veronique?
Sure. So I think one of the things that came out of our conversation was how do we listen? And very often in shaping a conversation, I think we need to sometimes go back to our values and state the values and think about how we listen to others in a conversation. And in today's world, there's so much noise, there's so much happening around us. Between a telephone and a computer, we don't necessarily know how to be, especially within the environment that we're in like today, how to listen to others and not to do many things at the same time. So learning how to listen with all our senses, being present in the conversation, and holding that space for others to be able to converse, to be able to say or express what they want to say, however they want to say it. whether it's with their body, with their voice, in whichever way. So I always think taking our 5 senses, or even 6 senses, into consideration into a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So time-wise, I've got all those notes in there, so hopefully Rocio or Janetta or somebody can pull that and keep it going. I guess I'm looking at David and Danita with a minute or two left. What are your thoughts on closure for our time here?
I think what always interests me about the conversations, you see, when I run the cafes myself, because I tend to run them more than take part in them, I'm very rare that I'm in the breakout rooms myself. And the one thing I've learnt about people in breakout rooms, they very rarely talk or answer the question that's been asked. I sometimes wonder whether there's ever any real need to actually pose a question. Just say, hey, talk about whatever makes sense to you. But I know in the conversation with Veronique and Velina, the one conversation there just reminded me that so often in small group conversations, we look to the conversational leader, maybe the person who's convened the conversation, to, I don't know, be inclusive, to bring everybody in. But it just reminded me that we all need to be aware of what's going on in the conversation. And if somebody is being excluded, or you know somebody is quiet, to bring them in. That we all need to be responsible for the quality of the conversation, rather than rely on one person to do that. And that's the one. It's something I know, but it's something that I'm taking away from this particular session as being reinforced.
Beautiful. And Danita, bring us home.
In the interest of time, the idea of conversing with yourself before conversing with others really was a theme that came through for me. Thank you all so much for your honesty, trust, inspiration, insights.
Yeah, and a big thank you from me, and enjoy your next session, and happy 20 years to KM4Dev.
Yay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Ooh, okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Bye, team.
Great to see everybody.
You too,
Yeah.
Brett.
Yeah, you too, Brett.